Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much for coming to this panel. I'd like to change the format a little bit. Please come closer. All right? So those people that are in the back, I'm the chair for today's session and a discussant as well as a presenter. So I'm a bit of an almighty, and at the same time I'm supposed to be a discussant in the next room. But I'm not going to be that discussant. Today we have two presenters, and we're going to try and limit our discussion to about 15 or 20 minutes maximum. And then what I'd like to do is open up the floor to Q&A. And if possible, I'd like to do consecutive presentations so that we can link the presentations so that we can have a dialogue between the presentations. So I do encourage you to take notes and engage in the discussion. Our second presenter, she's going to present, Dr. Shanda from Indo-Pacific University here, is going to present on gender security in Japan's Indo-Pacific world. And I'm going to present on the idea of the middle power pragmatism in the Indo-Pacific, Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. This paper is actually based on a journal article that I wrote in a French journal called Pirode. So if you're interested in it, I can pass on the journal article. So as the title talks about, I'm introducing the concept of a middle power and this idea of a pragmatism, and trying to look at how Japan is thinking about the Indo-Pacific region in general. And what I'd like to do in that process is to give you an introduction of, I think, how Japan has shifted its ideas about the free and open Indo-Pacific vision. But I want to give you some different perspectives that I think help us get a better understanding of where Japan is in terms of how it's thinking about this broad region. We know, I think, that as from Beijing's lens, that the free and open Indo-Pacific vision is a containment strategy. Depending on which scholars that you're engaging with, they'll suggest that Japan has more agency or has no agency, and that it's actually engaged in pursuing U.S. foreign policy. But I think as we look at it from other different countries' perspectives, whether it's Australia, India, some EU members, what we see is they look at Japan's view in a very, very different way. But what I think when we look, or my argument is Japan's FOIP is ambiguous and continuing to evolve. It's both reactive and proactive. And this is its strength and some of its, I think, internal weaknesses. It remains elusive as a tangible strategy, both in terms of its geography, where does it start, where does it end, what does it focus on, and where is it going? And you only have to look at the diplomatic bluebooks from 2017 to 2020 or 21 to see that FOIP is something that continues to evolve. And just this March, Prime Minister Kishida released the so-called Free and Open Indo-Pacific Plan, or FOIP 3.0, which really has different constituent parts. But I think it is important for us to understand that FOIP is with us and here, it's with us to stay. It is Japan's signature foreign policy, and it really stemmed out of Prime Minister Abe's engagement with the on the broader region. But when we look at this introduction about the free and open Indo-Pacific vision, which took place back in the early 2000s, we've seen, again, an evolution. Rather than a static understanding of the Indo-Pacific and what the Indo-Pacific should be, we see FOIP as this place where it's a demarcation point for broader articulation of the Indo-Pacific region. What is the region? What are the priorities for the region? What are the challenges that emerge that need to be dealt with? What are the instruments that need to be deployed within the region? And if you go back to 2007 and you think about which mini-laterals have emerged, whether it's AUKUS, whether it's the Quad, whether it's the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, whether it is other agreements such as IPEC, which was going to be coming to discussion in January, we see that the region continues to evolve and the institutions that are being deployed continues to evolve as it attempts to address different challenges within the region. So I guess my research questions that I'd like to touch upon for this paper really is, what are the critical junctures that have pushed forward to evolve in one direction or the other, and why? Is there institutionalization of these changes? And I think that's an important question to be asked. And I know at least one of the participants doesn't really like the idea of the Quad being institutionalized. But I guess the conclusion that I'm drawing is that FOIP is sensitive to power distribution changes, and it responds through a hybridized middle power approach. And what that means is that it's thinking about not only in terms of values, but it's thinking about the power that it has and how much power it can be delivered to the region. Power can be understood in terms of resources that are deployed. As we think about this a little bit more, I guess there's 5 sections that I want to touch upon. The theoretical framework, which I'll introduce this hybrid middle power approach or neo-middle power approach. I want to talk about, again, the Indo-Pacific Oceans in terms of Japan's maritime defense strategy, and then kind of talk about how this has evolved in terms of Japan's maritime strategy from the end of the Cold War to present, talk about Japan's approach today, and then lastly conclude by returning back to the questions that I posed at the start of today's presentation. So as we think about this hybrid middle power approach, really we can't really understand Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy through the lens of realism or liberal institutionalism. Neither of these really are useful tools for understanding it in a concrete way. We see Japan taking really a non-zero sum approach to the difficult relationships it faces within the region. And this is an image of Prime Minister Kishida and Secretary General Xi Jinping, but we should put this in the broader context. It was Prime Minister Abe that resurrected relationships with China, visiting China in 2019 to sign 55 infrastructure deals in third countries. He worked hard, despite the security challenges that do exist between the two countries, to find a way to make these two countries coexist. But at the same time, we see Japan strengthening its partnerships and alliances, recognizing China as a threat, or as the most recent national security strategy discusses, the idea of the greatest geopolitical challenge for Japan. So what we see is that FOIP contains elements of liberal institutionalism, but also a neo-realistic approach, understanding the realities of China's rise, the challenges that it's going to place on the region, and really, I think China's interest in revising and reshaping the regional order in a way that suits China's national interests, but also resetting or rebooting international order and international institutions that better reflect Chinese interests. So I guess the question is Japan taking a hedging and balancing approach through FOIP? And I do think that is the case. So as we're thinking about Japan's behavior, I guess it's really characterized by hedging and engagement. And I'm going to come back to some examples about this. But I think this approach is better understood as a hybrid middle power approach or neo-middle power approach to understanding Japan's diplomacy. It uses its limited resources, and we were just having a discussion. Next year, Japan will have less resources, and the year after will have less resources. So how does it manage these limited resources in a sustainable, regionally focused, and pragmatic way? And in my view, this is a middle power approach. It can't be a great power approach. It doesn't have unlimited approaches. So as we think about this over a longer period of time, I think it's useful for us to take a look at this graph because it really highlights the sea lanes of communication that are so critical for Japan's economy. We should clearly understand that about 5.5 trillion US dollars of trade are ferried through the sea lines of communication, the South China Sea, in and around the Taiwan Strait in Taiwan, through the East China Sea up to Japan, South Korea, and China. Clearly, Japan needs to keep these sea lines of communication open as an international trading nation. This has not changed since the Meiji period. In fact, it's become more critical as Japan has become a more critical part of the global economy. Of course, during the Cold War, Japan worked with the United States to ensure that the sea lines of communication were clear and open. But with the end of the Cold War, the reality is the United States has declining resources as it deals with more challenges. And that means countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and others need to step up to the plate to provide more support to deal with the sea lines of communication. Japan's particular focus on Southeast Asia, of course, is because most of the trade goes through the South China Sea. Most of its energy resources go through the South China Sea. And as a result, FOA has a strong, important, and I think central maritime strategy, is a central part of the FOA strategy. Now, I think when we look at it in terms of three phases or three critical junctures in terms of understanding where Japan is going in terms of FOA, initial phase, of course, is maybe 1969 to 1998, focusing on navigational safety. This was a result of really Japan limiting its activities as a result of its relationship with the United States. From 1999 to 2009, we see an expanded set of activities and operations, including civilian maritime law enforcement capabilities. 2010 to today, we see regional focus, but also capacity building to try and deal with the challenges that Japan understands in the maritime domain. The regional aspect is an expanded focus of thinking about where Japan's interests lie. Do they lie just in the South China Sea, or do they lie beyond that? And I think if you take a look at the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision, it really understands that the sea lines of communication that connect the Pacific Ocean through the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, really up to the east coast of Africa, are critical for Japan's economic security. In terms of capacity, we see a very big shift in terms of how Japan is deploying its resources, both in terms of self-defense forces, but also its constabulary capacities, Coast Guard. And these are important barometers to watch how Japan is changing its engagement within the region. Post-Cold War, of course, when we take a look at this, we see a lot of continuity, but also incremental change. The US was reconfiguring its global military footprint, and Japan required rethinking in terms of regional security risks, whether it's Sino-Japanese relations, Korean Peninsula, or endogenous factors. And here I'm thinking about declining capabilities as its economy is in relative decline. So what we see is an incremental expansion in terms of scope and breadth of Japan's maritime security acquisitions and activities. The most recent example of this, of course, is the National Security Strategy that was released in 2022, which really defines where Japan's going to go in the next 5 years in terms of the kinds of capabilities it needs to deal with the challenges within the region. Contemporary strategy to the Indo-Pacific, again, this idea of a very pragmatic approach to diplomacy, and I'm using this idea of middle power. If we look at barometers such as the Asia, Lowy Institute's Asia Power Index, Japan clearly is a middle power. China and the United States at the top, we have a huge gap in terms of comprehensive capabilities, and then at the bottom we have small countries like Nepal and Maldives. Based on these ideas, I think Prime Minister Abe brought to light his ideas of an Indo-Pacific vision, shifted away from normative aspects of diplomacy, representing this idea of a hybridized or neo-middle power approach to using limited resources to shape the Indo-Pacific region. Focus on the rules-based order, which I'll come back to, but I think Japan's Indo-Pacific vision under Prime Minister Abe really inculcated or brought in the concerns of Indo-Pacific stakeholders in the Free and Open Indo-Pacific region. And I was mentioning to Lynn just before, if we look at the diplomatic blue books of 2017, 2018, 2019, and 20, we see a gradual inclusion of ASEAN centrality, speaking more and more about where ASEAN sits in terms of the importance of the Free and Open Indo-Pacific vision. And if you look at the recent Kishida document on the Indo-Pacific plan, it even highlights this even more, talking about the Pacific Islands and other stakeholders in terms of realizing this Indo-Pacific vision. 2.0 version of FOA centered on, again, garnering support from the region to ensure that it will be sustainable, and moving or translating or shifting the idea of a strategy to a broader vision for many reasons. The Chinese characters for strategy includes a kanji for war, which is quite aggressive for, I think, kanji using countries, but vision suggested that it had a broader vision for the region. So part of this vision, of course, is deepening the US alliance, and this continues to be the case. It strengthens it comprehensively.
and again, consistently advocating for the United States' inclusion and involvement in the region in an attempt to anchor the United States in the region. It tried to anchor the United States in the TPP, the CPTP, and right now with IPEF. Whether IPEF will have teeth, that's a different story. But again, we see Japan through FOIP still discussing the US as Japan's most important comprehensive partner. But of course, there's a need to adjust FOIP to the realities of the US-China relationship. The deterioration of the US-China relationship has shaped FOIP's evolution. Japan's doubling down on joining multilateral trade agreements, proactively rebranding FOIP-related activities, and we see new multilateral and bilateral initiatives. For example, MOUs between US, Japan, and Australia, things like the Blue Dot Network. But you've also seen infrastructure and connectivity agreements to try and again provide public goods to the region and moving away from a purely security-focused approach to engagement. We saw the Trump administration's pressuring the Trump administration's approach to China also has shifted Japan's focus. In particular, how the Trump administration really looked at initiatives such as China's Made in China 2025 initiative and its tech industry as challenges to the US in the region and Japan. And here again, we see Japan understanding this and incorporating a digital agenda into its initiatives to try and create an alternative to a purely securitized understanding of the free and open Indo-Pacific. The Quad is also a really interesting layer of institutional support. It anchors the United States in the region. The inclusion of India is a signal to the developing world that the developing world is not a follower, but part of institutions that are shaping the region. And I think this is really, really important. And it counters these false narratives that the global South is somehow not part of shaping international institutions. But it also manages challenges associated with China's reemergence within the region by creating a critical mass of countries that have enough shared interests to provide public goods within the region. We do know that initiatives such as the Quad are not well received by China or ASEAN as a whole. But again, we need to drill down into initiatives like the Quad and ask Southeast Asian countries individually how they understand the Quad and how important it is for providing goods to the region. The emergence of the Quad as an institution within the region, again, is important for in terms of furthering its economic and technological agendas to shape the region's norms and create this critical mass of countries that can counterbalance China in terms of size, technology, and its footprint within the region. So I guess the next question is what is the critical junctures that have pushed forward to evolve and why? Are these changes being institutionalized? And I guess the key core tenets of FOIP are grounded in Japan's need to have an unobstructed, stable, and rules-based governance to sea lanes of communication in the Indo-Pacific. And the critical junctures that have helped compel Japan to alter its vision have not exclusively come from the challenges emerging in the region. And I think this is important. We often talk about China as being the driver of Japan's foreign policies, but in reality, Japan has strong concerns about the direction of the United States moving forward and its ability to be proactive and sustained diplomatic actor in the region. So as we think about FOIP, we think about it creating a rules-based order based on this idea of accommodating China's rise. There's no future Japanese economy without some kind of accommodation of China. Second is integrating this idea of deeply putting Japan into the Indo-Pacific's political economy and rules-making process, being at the table, not on the menu. Tightening cooperation between Japan and the US alliance, and cementing the US presence within the region. And lastly is diversifying partnerships, whether it's the regional access agreements between Australia and the UK, whether it's the Camp David principles that were agreed upon this summer to rectify and rehabilitate South Korea, Japan, US cooperation, whether it's Japan's infrastructure connectivity agreements with Europe, or economic partnerships with Europe. These are all meant to diversify strategic partnerships within the region. I guess the conclusion that we can take is that Japan's approach is really a hybrid middle power approach. It includes hedging and engagement to secure its interests. Hedging, of course, is bringing the United States in, tightening security partnerships, but at the same time engaging with China through trade agreements, through some kind of environmental cooperation, but also bringing in other partners within the region. It's regionally focused, but again, results driven. In terms of, I think, important areas such as AI and quantum computing and other emerging technologies, what we see is Japan continues to manage a growingly assertive behavior with one country to try and shape the future direction of forward. And that means more cooperation through Quad in terms of emerging technologies. I think we will likely see Japan find a way to cooperate with the AUKUS agreement. And we're seeing Japan out on the forefront of trying to shape AI regulation. Of course, the limits of the Japan approach will be tested. They'll be tested by a potential Taiwan contingency. They'll be tested by potential economic instability in China and how this will affect Chinese calculations. And of course, they'll be affected by what happens in Washington, not just in the election in 2024, but where is Washington going in the next year, next 4 years, next 10 years. The success or failure, I think, of the Biden administration in navigating foreign policies and challenges will be central to Tokyo's forward calculations. President Biden potentially may not be re-elected. It raises questions about these new emerging partnerships, such as those based on the Camp David principles, or the selective diversification of semiconductor supplies with Taiwan, South Korea, the Netherlands, United States, and Japan, and of course trade agreements within the region. A potential Trump administration may change all of these calculations. A potential Trump administration may see a grand bargain over Taiwan as something that they can live with. And again, how will Tokyo manage this, and how will the free and open Indo-Pacific vision be shaped by these calculations in Washington is something that we need to look at as Japan's forward continues to evolve. So I'm going to stop there, and again, I'd like to welcome my next speaker, Ashanda, to come and speak on gender and security in Japan's Indo-Pacific. Ashanda.